Good evening, everyone. We welcome you all on behalf of Abhyuday to the second talk series of Know Your Pavaile. It is our great fortune that we, as IIT Bombay campus residents, get to live on the edges of Pavaile. But do you know, this amazing urban ecosystem with a phenomenal amount of biodiversity is facing a great threat due to urbanization. Not only Pavaile, but lakes and other parts of the country are witnessing the same degradation. Therefore, being responsible citizens, it is our responsibility to educate people about wetlands and what needs to be done to conserve them. Thus, to bring awareness about the importance of the lake, Abhyuday is arranging a talk series, Know Your Pavai Lake, which consists of talks by various experts who have studied the Pavai Lake and its ecosystem scientifically and by nature lovers who have explored the lake inspired by its flora and fauna. Our second talk in this series being given today is Know Your Pavaili, Ecological Restoration of Degraded Wetlands. For this, we have with us Professor H.S. Shankar from the Department of Chemical Engineering at IIT Bombay. So I hand over to Mike to Kavi Arya for further proceedings.
Thank you, Bhavna. My name is Kavi Arya. I am mentor to the Abhyuday students at IIT Bombay, and I am very delighted and proud that they've chosen a very important and significant and very topical topic today. That's the preservation of wetlands, especially given what's happening not only in the country but on our own doorstep in Powai Lake, with the threat of development all around it. So I won't say much. I'd just like to introduce Professor Shankar from my side. I've known him as a very offbeat kind of scientist and unafraid to go into kind of unconventional subjects like sanitation and stuff like that. And I remember him for his seminal work on wastewater treatment using biological systems, right? And the epitome of that was something I saw over a decade ago in Love Grove pumping station of BMC. So he's actually installed something that is quite impressive. I saw a huge mound of soil there, right, with plants on it. And that soil was actually a bioreactor which would purify water. So he'd get 1 million liters of grey water from BMC, sprinkle on this bioreactor, and by the time it reaches the bottom of this thing, it was lined with plastic which would empty it into a tank, which would be very, very clean water. So he was using natural systems to clean water. And he says, okay, why plants? He number of reasons he can speak about that himself. But the plants are what he called the bioindicators. So I really love the way that natural systems were integrated with science and engineering to create something quite remarkable. So it's one of the earliest instances of something very fashionable nowadays called biomimicry. Right? Biomimicry is a new discovery of the world, but Professor Shankar has been doing it for a long time. And so I won't say much more, but we also have his student here with us, Jayant Kulkarni, who did his chemical engineering years ago and did his MTech with Professor Shankar in 85. And he's been a forest officer, right? So he joined that cadre for about 5 years, and after that he did work in industry and so on. But what's interesting is that he runs an NGO based out of Pune called Wildlife Research and Conservation Society. So he's another example of a slightly offbeat IIT career, and maybe students might want to ask him what possessed him to do what he's doing and so on. So that's that. I would very much like to welcome two stalwarts of ours who are both IIT alumni to enlighten us on lakes. What are lakes? Why are they important to us? And what should we do to conserve them? So over to Professor Shankar.
Should we start? Thank you, all of you. Can you hear me?
Yes, you
Okay.
can speak louder anyway.
Uh, First, I'm so delighted to be speaking to my friends, my colleagues, my students of IIT. I've been out of IIT for more than 10 years, so I'm sort of out of touch with IIT in a sense. But as Professor Arya mentioned, we've been deep into doing what's called as natural systems for restoration, whether it is water, whether it is land, whatever. And we're doing this pan India now. almost 10 years, and I'm really delighted for this opportunity. Now, this background to what I am speaking today, this I've called it as ecological restoration, and Jayant Kulkarni will have a lot more to say than what I have to say because he's really into it. But we have been doing this in a slightly different way, so the differences I will bring out in what I am saying right now. Next one, please. See, one thing that I have learned while I was at IIT looking at this whole thing about wetlands is that wetlands are highly productive. And I had a good occasion to go to eastern India, particularly the Sundarbans, one of the finest wetlands that it exists in this world. And they're highly productive, full of forest, water, animals, and so on. It was so delightful. So when I looked at the numbers, I found that the productivity of wetlands is almost same as equatorial forest. Something that I started to appreciate only after I actually saw. Not, I mean, I've been living in Calcutta for many years in my younger days, but I never went to Sundarbans. But wetlands are the most productive in terms of its biomass productivity, and we must preserve this. And Powai Lake is one good example where you and I live many years, and it has degraded significantly over the years. And it's something that we would like to understand how we can restore it, and that's my prime object of this presentation. I go to the next one like this. I mean, I've said this already. The fact that it is degrading is primarily because of overload. The overload can be of various types. The most important overload here is the fact that human settlements bring in various kinds of overloads in terms of chemicals, in terms of the fact that they interfere with the ecology and so on. And this is something that we need to understand and take care. Now, this word ecological engineering, I have learned from my student. His name is Uday Bawalkar. I mean, one of the very interesting thinkers I have come across. He's also from Pune, like Jayant, and he taught me this. He taught me what is ecological engineering. His simple way is that whatever we do, it must synthesize, synergize with the natural cycles. I mean, this is the fundamental message. And he also taught me a lot of things about what it means in terms of actually delivering what we are saying. See, what I'm finding is that, I mean, lakes are one of them, and I've been in some committees of Government of India as well, and a lot of lakes around the world, I mean, including India. I've seen the, various kinds of degradation, and the most important thing that I have found is that a lack of forest protecting the lake, protecting the water body. This is what I found. I'll show you some examples as well. And I try to give some examples as to how we can understand this from the standpoint of global carbon cycle. See, these some pictures that we have. See, the previous commissioner, Mr. Praveen Pardesi, while he was a commissioner of the city, he told me that let us try and restore all the lakes of the city of Bombay. For that, he told me that we're going to make a survey and then make a plan as to what can be done so that we restore all the lakes. I mean, this is how this work started some time back. So there are a large number of lakes. The survey has been done and a report has been submitted to the corporation. I've just taken some parts of it. As you can see in this particular lake, it's in very bad shape. It's gone again. One moment. Uh, so this waste dumping. What has happened. I mean, I'm sure you understand this. Since the water body is confined, it does not have the way to exchange this water with outside, and people use it as a dumping ground. That's a very serious issue. And of course, there are many such photographs I have gotten to show to our commissioner that it is in bad shape and requires attention, requires restoration, and so on. So I'll show you some more of these pictures. I've shown this picture of Sabarmati to bring in context. See, this looks very beautiful. I agree with all, but the fact is, the shoreline is all concrete. So it is a kind of ecosystem which perhaps is very different from what I would have understood as a wetland, because this is something that has been completely modified using concrete, and I consider this as an overuse of concrete. Now, there are many such examples I've shown here. You can see this containment partly in stone, and the other parts already with waste being uh, dumped. And there's habitation on one side, therefore, the waste from the habitation is entering the lake and so on. And you can also see some people nearby. Now, once again, same example. This is a bigger lake in Malad, not far away. Once again, in bad shape. Now, of course, this is in terrible shape in Malad, completely vegetated, showing that the uh, nearby habitation is affecting the quality of the lake. This is nearby, somewhere near Chembur and Sion. So, what in essence, what I have understood by looking at the lakes in Bombay City around 2016, 2018, when Mr. Pardesi was the commissioner, the lakes have poor vegetation surrounding it. Lakes are surrounded by a lot of habitation. In many cases, the lakes have been, impounded with a lot of concrete and things like that, and the lake is not able to exchange with soil nearby and so on. So, our way of restoring this is what we are most interested. So, I'll show some. So, our principle of restoration, how I am looking, and please correct me if I am right or wrong, that the hinterland of this wetland must have sufficient amount of forested area. And if this can be ensured, I'll show you some examples from carbon cycle as to why it is should be that way. If this can be ensured, then the quality of the lake can be taken care. And in fact, I mean, places like Powai, not long ago, maybe 100 years ago, this is one of the finest forests of the city, which it has undergone a lot of changes in terms of human habitation and so on. And a lot of it can still be restored, and it can be done if we actually understand the basic message of carbon cycle. So let me spend a few minutes on what I want to say. There's a lot of message in carbon cycle, and people run an entire course of 1 year on this what I'm showing to you just now. See what carbon cycle tells us, and this is not new to any of you. You're all well educated that there is the atmosphere, there is the hydrosphere, there is the biosphere of land, and there is the lithosphere. In the language of common, this atmosphere is called air, water, land, soil. Now, carbon is present in these four pools of carbon, which is atmosphere, hydrosphere, biosphere, and lithosphere. And carbon exchanges, it's gone again. Carbon exchanges. Okay, I'm sorry. See, carbon is exchange because of a biogeochemical engineering activity going on in the different pools of carbon. So the most important message I want to convey to all of you is that the respiration rates from water compared to the respiration rates from land and soil is roughly the same, which is about 90 billion tons of carbon per year. Let me repeat, the respiration rates from water compared to the respiration rates in land and soil is roughly about one is 90, one is 110, roughly equal. Or in other words, the logic that I want to present to you today is that our design of water bodies by and large must respect this design, that the respiration rates of the hinterland must have enough forest so that the two respiration rates are not very different. And this is the most important message which I want to convey. There is a related message which is connected to this, which also says that the total amount of life in water is very small compared to the amount of life on land. So life in water is very small. Put in the language of energetics, what we are trying to say is that the energy required to live in water is relatively large compared to energy required to live on land. So there is a corollary to this, which we have, as Professor Arya pointed out. I mean, this our whole idea of using soil as a bioreactor for cleaning water actually came out of this central message of energetics, that if you do any work in terrestrial ecosystem, cleaning of water, etc., requires much less energy than if you do it in an aquatic ecosystem. In other words, what I'm trying to put across to you is that if you know how to engineer a terrestrial ecosystem to clean water, you don't need much energy. But if you do the same thing in aquatic ecosystem, like what we are doing around the world today, all the cleaning of wastewater is done only in aquatic ecosystem. So, moment you go from water to land, the energy required is very small. And this is the central message of carbon cycle. This is the central message I want to convey to you from the point of view of restoring water bodies, point of view of restoring our landscape and so on, including wetlands such as Powai Lake. I'm showing some good pictures because these are pictures I've taken over the years. This is a good example of my Giants will have more to say on this. It shows that the shoreline has nicely connected with the water body. Now I'm showing some more pictures. These are in other parts of the country, but here there's a lot of construction. To the extent that there is construction, the shoreline is not what is appropriate for the ecosystem. Giants will have more to say on this. Now, for example, here is a lake which is densely populated around, but that is to the extent is vegetated. Therefore, the water is not spoiled. That means, to the extent there is vegetation, the water has been kept in reasonable shape. So, of course, there is another lake in Jammu where things are much better. There is vegetation and so on. Plus, population, interference is also relatively low. As you can see, the water quality is very good. Now, this is Dakuria Lake, is where I have grown up in my younger days. I've taken swimming in all these lakes in those younger days, but it's very highly vegetated. In fact, the Dakuria area of Calcutta of those days, when I've seen myself, it's extremely well vegetated. The water quality is very good, consequent to what is going again. Consequent to the fact that there's very good vegetation. So the point that comes across to from all this is that if you can maintain good vegetation, then the lake quality, water quality, etc., it can be substantially maintained. At the same time, the silting that is consequent to the runoff is also substantially less. And that's another big advantage of the forest protecting the water body.
So, Professor Shankar,
Yeah,
may I just interrupt here?
please.
See, one very important point might not have gone home on those earlier slides that you mentioned about the amount of energy that it takes to clean, to do any cleansing is much more in water than it is on land,
Yeah.
right? So what I think that needs to be elaborated on as to what the meaning of that is. You mean
I'll do
that
that. I mean, now you may raise a very important point because this is the central point of the fact that this technology which came out of IIT, Jayant was not there at that time. It came a little later than after he left. See, what we discovered by looking at this global carbon cycle is that the total amount of life in water is something like 3 billion tons measured as carbon. You and I are about 4 kilograms of carbon. The total amount of life on land and soil together is about 750 billion tons. So if you look at the respiration, that means the respiration is the one that is indicative of the energy that is required for life in land and water. That translates like this. That means anything that you do in a terrestrial ecosystem, because of the abundance of oxygen, you don't need so much of energy. But if you do it in water, the solubility of oxygen in water is 6 milligrams per liter in our temperatures, and diffusion coefficient of water in water is 10 minus 9 meters squared per second, while in terrestrial atmosphere it is 10 minus 4. In other words, the oxygen diffusion coefficient in land terrestrial ecosystem is almost a million times higher than
so?
in
Shankar,
water. This is the great advantage of the terrestrial ecosystem.
may I interrupt again?
Please.
So I think the message that needs to go home here is that if you have to treat, for instance, sewage water,
Yeah.
it is far more effective to treat it on land than it is to treat it in water.
Yes.
That means that the best way to clean sewage is to pass it through a land-based system before it reaches the water, because once it goes into the water, it is very difficult. It takes much more energy to clean it.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, now that Professor Arya has mentioned this, if some of you have time, there are close to 100 plants in different parts of the country where we have demonstrated the use of soil environment to clean water. Of course, close to Pune is the Pandharpur. Pandharpur has it's a very religious site. And during Ashad Ekadasi day, close to 2 or 3 lakh people come, and this plant it's working there for the last few years, and there are many. In fact, at the BMC in Love Grove, people don't. In fact, what you see is a forest today. In fact, it is not even small plant. They're all huge. I mean, trees can be seen where we have used this soil environment to clean water, and this water is used for pump cleaning. It is used in the golf club. It is used in the turf club, and so on. So it is something that we have demonstrated over the years. It requires more land compared to the mechanical system uh, that is coming to us from other parts of the world, and so on. Uh, Plus the fact that any technology that comes from other parts of the world has a slightly higher acceptability in this country compared to anything that is indigenous. So it's something that we are learning to deal with, and things have improved a lot over the years. There is good reception to what we are saying, and a number of tenders are actually awarded to us. Gujarat in particular has been in the forefront, and similarly Karnataka and things like that. Shall I go forward, Kavi?
Please do, please do. Sorry.
So this is this Lonar lake in also in Maharashtra. As you can see, the shorelines are fairly well maintained, and there is reasonable forest around. And the basic concept of maintaining the water quality has been preserved here, and this lake appears to be in very good shape. So the point I want to get across to you is that in case of degraded wetlands, the best way would be to create forest. And carbon cycle tells us that if the land area is X, at least 0.2x should be a forest of the hinterland. This is roughly the message that comes from the carbon cycle, and this is what we have by and large tried to adopt wherever we have tried to restore the wetlands. So, in the context of the lake that we are looking at, minimally, if we can create about 20 meters of land where we can forest, it would significantly change the water holdup. At the same time, the water quality and the life of this lake. So I'm just putting it in the form of a picture. You can see the silt at the bottom of the lake. So what is being suggested is that if we can pick up the silt using a dredger and then distribute it along the periphery and then create a forest over it, there will be a disturbance to the ecology during the time of dredging. That's an issue. But if you want to restore the lake and improve the water holding capacity, at the same time water quality for a long time to come, this may be a necessary evil that we have to accept. In fact, in 1993, when the commissioner accepted to do this in the meeting at Raj Bhavan, the idea was that if we can enter the lake from the IIT side, it might be easier, be far less disturbance to the other community and so on. And that plan did not work through for whatever some reasons or the other. But the plan is very much in the agenda of the corporation. Desilting is one of their major duties, so they'll probably do it sometime or the other, depending upon the acceptability of all the people involved. So, just to cut the long story short, what I'm trying to put across to you is that the lake or the water body to be restored requires a forest, minimally at least 0.2% or 0.2, I mean 20% of the water area should be in forest of the hinterland of the water body. If we can do this, by and large, the lake, the water body, and the wetland can be restored, and the ecosystem can be restored very effectively, as can be seen in the Lonar Lake of Buldana. So that's roughly what I would like to say. Thank you very much.
Professor Shankar, what you says is 80%.
That's 0.2. That's a spelling mistake. Please,
Okay.
we'll correct it. It's 0.2, not 0.8.
Okay.
It's 0.2.
Okay. Perhaps we should hand the floor over to Jayant Kulkarni here, who can continue the story from his side. Thank you, Professor Shankar.
Dr. Jayant, I have made you presenter.
Yes, I saw that. Yeah, thank you very much. So,
And then we can take the questions at the end of his session.
okay, fine. Great. I just start sharing. Right? Yeah. So, yeah, is it visible now? The
Yeah.
presentation?
I
Okay.
think so.
So, yeah, good evening, everybody. I'm Jayant Kulkarni. Professor Aviarya has already introduced me. It's a pleasure to talk to you all today evening and to share the floor with Professor Shankar. He was my MTech guide. I would say one of the best guides that I could have had, and yeah, it's very good that I'll be able to complement whatever he has said today. So yes, so today, like I have been working in the wildlife field for quite a number of years now, and I used to be a very keen bird watcher when I was a student at IIT, and then I continued this liking. I was a forest officer for a few years, and now I'm with the NGO Wildlife Research and Conservation Society, and I haven't done actually work on wetlands, but I have had an occasion to study it and think about it for a few years. So I'll say whatever knowledge or understanding I've gathered. So that's the point that I'll try to share with you today. So some of the main features of wetlands. So firstly, wetlands are considered to be a transition zone or an ecotone between land and water. The thing is that, of course, I mean, water is of course very important for wetlands, but nevertheless, land is also important. So you can't probably, if you have like deep ocean or something, that would probably not be properly be considered a wetland. They are considered to be highly productive ecosystem. Professor Shankar already told us about that. And something about the energetics of wetlands also. But what I want to say is they are considered to have very high levels of biodiversity as well as unique forms of biodiversity because of the nature of being a combination of water ecosystem and land ecosystem, or the meeting point of water and land ecosystem. At the same time, interestingly, the soils in wetlands are poor in oxygen. They are called hydric soils. As Professor Shankar said, that's due to the low diffusion coefficient of oxygen in water. So the aquatic plants which grow in wetlands, they are adapted to grow in such soils with poor or what is known as anoxic kind of soil conditions in wetlands. They have a lot of uses. They're very important for food. I mean, we all know that because all our fish comes from most of fish comes from wetlands, and economically, it's very important for the fishermen who depend on fishing for their livelihood. They are for water storage, of course, they are very important, and interestingly, they are also important for flood control because they form a kind of a buffer, you know. So if there are very high rainfall conditions, then these, especially large wetlands, they play the role of having, of flood control. So many of our dams have been probably constructed with this idea. For aside from irrigation, they also have valuable role in flood control. And then again for mitigating climate change by carbon absorption. So again, this goes back to what Professor Shankar said about the role of wetlands in the carbon cycle. and they are protected by the Ramsar Convention. So I think a few decades back, all the countries of the world got together and said that wetlands need to be protected for their. I mean, there was a phase where many of the wetlands were being rapidly degraded. So they formed some kind of strategies for conservation of wetlands. And an important part of the strategy was you can't have a protection, a total protection kind of system. So you have to have kind of some sustainable utilization. So I mean, we need some kind of usage of wetlands, but it should not be an over usage so that they don't get degraded rapidly. I'll move on. Sorry. Yeah. So something about types of wetlands. We have the lakes and the ponds, which have got a slightly deepish water body. Marshes, which generally tend to have a shallow kind of water level, are considered marshes. And most of the marshes are generally have vegetation. So almost throughout the marsh, you have some kind of vegetation growing there, aquatic vegetation. Then you have peats and bogs, where there is a high humus or organic content with some water content. So these are also considered as wetlands. Then categorizing wetlands. So you have categories, what is called as lotic wetland, which has flowing water, and lentic, which have got standing water. So our Savoy Lake would be considered as an example of lentic wetland. And then again, you have freshwater wetlands, brackish wetlands, as saltwater wetlands also. And then going on to the lakes, since we, I mean, one of the context of today's talk is Powai Lake, so I talk more about lakes. And so we have what is known as oligotrophic lakes and the eutrophic lakes. So oligotrophic lakes are lakes which have recently formed, and they generally have clean water. And they tend to have slightly steep sides. Of course, many of these systems have now been changed because of man-made forces. But if you see the natural kind of lakes which are there, so they have these categories of oligotrophic and eutrophic. So eutrophic lakes, because of gradual flow of silt as well as nutrients into the lake, they tend to have siltation, and the shores of especially of eutrophic lakes they have more gentle slopes. So this is one of the characteristics of eutrophic lakes. And again, the water there in eutrophic lakes, it tends to have higher level of nutrient content. So this has got some positive as well as some negative side to it. Eutrophic lake often, because of the gradual, for like ages, the nutrients have been flowing to the lake, so they tend to be shallow, while oligotrophic lakes are generally deeper than. And something about the food chain in the wetlands. So the producers in wetlands, the main producers are the plankton. Of course, aquatic vegetation is also important. Aquatic vegetation, however, it exists mainly on the shoreline, while plankton is there throughout the water body. So these are the primary producers in wetlands, and then they are fed upon by the which is the phytoplankton, and they are fed upon by the zooplankton. And then it goes on to vertebrates as well as some the smaller fish, which then again which are fed upon by the larger fish, then the vertebrates, the birds, reptiles, etc. So this is and at the highest level you have the raptors, and of course some of the aquatic other vertebrate fauna also, like crocodiles, the mammals, etc. So this forms the food chain, and at times it can be a very complex food chain also. And also, okay, so this part is actually very important. So I'd like to dwell on this part quite a lot. So this is what we have, the main zones of a wetland. So we have the shore, which is above the water level, which has you can have trees, it can have shrubs, grasses, etc. And then you move to the what is known as a littoral zone, which is the I mean just it's also part of the considered part of the shore, where you have aquatic vegetation. But again, in the aquatic vegetation, you have various zones of or categories of aquatic vegetation. So we have the shallow zone, which is known as the fringing marsh, and it's a slightly deeper zone, again, the vegetation there is categorized as emergent vegetation, and then you go into slightly deeper marsh zone where the vegetation is mix of what is known as the emergent as well as the submergent vegetation. So this zone, the littoral zone, and after the littoral zone, what you have is the what is called the limnetic zone or the open water area. So this littoral zone is actually one of the most important parts of the wetland because most of the action, so to say, it takes place here, and it's especially very important for shorebirds, and it forms the zone where the land fauna can actually interact with the aquatic fauna. So many of the birds you will find they feed actually in this area in the littoral zone, and the shallower the littoral zone is, the better it is for the wetland. So if it's shallow, then you tend to get a very wide littoral zone. While if it's a steep kind of littoral zone, then it tends to be narrow. So if you have a shallow littoral zone, it extends for many meters into the water body, and you have a very large area where lots of fauna can feed over there, especially the shorebirds. So the importance of the littoral zone, like I said, is the shallow zone near the shoreline of the lake. It's edge habitat between water and land. So if you have some knowledge of biology or ecology, you know that the edge habitat between two ecosystems often is the most productive kind of habitat because the fauna which lives in the edge, it can take advantage of both the habitats. So this is an example of the edge habitat. It can be gently sloping like a wide, or it can be steep, a narrow zone. It gets lots of nutrient flow from the shore, so it has a lot of productivity because of that. Plenty of aquatic life and algal growth, and like I said, very important for shorebirds. We provide lots of feeding opportunities for shorebirds on invertebrates, especially like crustaceans, snails, insects, and so on, and also for fish eating egrets and storks, because many of these egrets and stork, they are not swimming birds, so they have to but they are fish eaters. So this zone provides an opportunity for them to hunt and eat fish. And the reeds and grass in this zone, they provide cover, excellent cover for birds such as bitterns, crags, poots, moorhens, etc. And it also provides a resting and nesting habitat for turtles and crocodiles. So like I said, land animals like birds, they use this zone for feeding, and aquatic animals like turtles and crocodiles, they use this zone for nesting and resting. So that's why the littoral zone is very important, and its protection is also because of it, it's very important. So I'll just go into a few birds of wetlands. I'll have a few slides on that. I'll try to describe to you various categories of birds of wetlands. Partly because why birds? Because partly they are the kind of the most visible fauna found in wetlands, and partly because I'm a bird watcher and I love birds, and I know a lot more about birds than about another category. Right. So okay. So these are shorebirds. I'm sure there are many bird watchers today among you, so you know all of these. So these are commonly the sandpipers, which are the most common category. You have here and even among sandpipers. So these sandpipers, you have the black-winged stilt. They also specialize. So some of them, they tend to live feed just on the edge of the water. So you will find birds like stilts and plovers. They'll feed on the insects in the moister zones just above the shoreline. Then you have some birds like the common sandpiper, marsh sandpiper. They venture a little bit into the shallower kind of water depths. And then you have these black-winged stilts, which like venture deeper into the water. They'll stand in about 8 to 12 inches of water and feed in the insects and the invertebrates in that zone. So all of these zones, even in the shore, all these zones are used by different categories of birds. Then you have the storks, the painted stork, open-bill stork, etc. So they also feed. They'll wade into the water. They have longer legs, so they can go far deeper, and they'll feed on fish and invertebrates there. in the shoreline. And the open bill stork, again, you can see it's about an open bill. It's an interesting bird. So this open bill is because it feeds a lot on snails. It takes the snails from the this thing shoreline. It also picks up snails from other areas also, like agricultural fields, etc. And this open bill of it makes it convenient for it to feed on snails, especially. So it's an adaptation for its lifestyle of feeding on snails. Egrets and herons, so they are mostly fish-eating birds, and they also frequent these shoreline quite a lot. And they'll stand there for hours, like a statue, and wait for the right opportunity to feed on a nice juicy fish as it passes by. There, of course, there are pond herons also, but then they don't qualify actually properly as wetland birds. Then something about heronries and nesting colonies. So this is where some of these birds, they use the land. So though they feed in water, they'll use the land for nesting. Especially the nesting colonies are made by cormorants, herons, storks, ibis, spoonbill, pelicans, a wide variety of birds. And this is probably where Professor Shankar was saying about protecting forests. So I think protection of forests is also important from this point of view, as it provides very good nesting habitat for many bird species. Then flamingos, they need extensive shallow zones. I mean, and flamingos, of course, they are unique kind of features. They are filter feeders. They feed by dipping their beak into the water and filtering out the plankton and the algae from the water. And they can survive in brackish water as well as fresh water. And some of the coastal areas near Bombay, they are excellent places for flamingos. The Shivdi estuarine region, and also near Airoli, all these places, there you have lots of flamingos coming. Then the swimming birds, they are ducks. Most of them are plant eaters. They survive mostly herbivores. They survive mainly on plants. So some of them specialize in the surface floating vegetation, like the shoveler. On the upper right hand side, you can see it feeds, its beak is designed so it shovels the plants, the floating plants, into its beak, while some of them dive and take the vegetation which is there growing at the bottom of the lake. Of course, there are fish-eating ducks also, but in India we have very few examples of fish-eating ducks. Most of them are herbivores. Then there are birds that walk on floating vegetation. So most of these, water lilies and lotus. So they also most of these plants are again found on the shoreline, and they have the bronze-winged jasana, then the pheasant-tailed jasana, the purple swamp hen. So they walk a lot on this floating vegetation. Sorry, there seemed to be some kind of glitch. Yeah, so then there are some of the birds which actually dive into the water. So sorry, I wrote ducks. That's a mistake. It's mostly the little cormorant, the great cormorant, and the grebes. So these are fish-eating birds. So they dive into the water and catch the fish and swallow it whole. And then the birds will dive into the water from the air. They are not the swimming birds. So these are the kingfishers and the terns. And especially the little blue kingfisher and the white-throated kingfisher, they are again dependent on the shoreline because they don't venture far into the water. They sort of sit there on the hanging branch near the water and on the lookout for fish. And when they get the right opportunity, they'll quickly dive down into the water and grab the fish. While the pied kingfisher and the tern, they tend to venture rather farther into the water and dive from the, and hover, they're looking for fish, and when they find the right fish, they'll dive into it and catch the fish. So all these birds, they have different lifestyles and different ways of getting their food. And then you have the raptors, which actually they feed on, a lot of them feed on fish, but some of them also they hunt for birds. So these are raptors have specified as the ones mostly which are found near the water: the marsh harrier, osprey, and the fish eagle. And there is of course the white-bellied sea eagle also, which also tends to live on, but that tends to live on the shore, coastal zones. And then you have other aquatic fauna other than the birds, which are the crocodiles and the turtles and the otters. So they also use the shoreline a lot. Though they spend a lot of time inside the water, but they need the shoreline. Okay, so then I'll go on to what are the main threats to the wetlands. We already talked about this sewage and pollution. Sewage adds excess nutrients to water, typically nitrogen, and it actually overloads the natural cleaning process of the wetland, and it creates algal blooms. And these algal blooms, they suddenly, a lot of organic matter is created in the water. And when these algae die, they sink to the bottom of the floor of the lake, and the organic matter tends to absorb oxygen from the water, and it depletes the oxygen content of this thing, which can at times become very dangerous, and also it blocks the uptake of oxygen also from the water surface. So it can occasionally cause a lot of fish mortality also, and it leads to what I talked earlier about eutrophication of lakes. And then along with this, you can have pesticides, agricultural waste, etc., flowing into the water and polluting the water. Okay, water hyacinth. So water hyacinth is often considered to be one of a major problem. So, but I also call it, is it a problem or a symptom? Because it's you can see it's a very beautiful plant. It was introduced from South America to many places in the world, and then it's a highly invasive species, and it rapidly became a nuisance. But what happens? I found that water hyacinth, it grows mainly in water which has a high nutrient content. So clean water, you rarely see water hyacinth. So if you compare between Powai Lake and Bihar Lake, for example, Powai has a lot of water hyacinth, but you will rarely find water hyacinth in Bihar Lake because the water of Bihar Lake is very clean. So so water hyacinth, I would say it's more of a symptom that our water is polluted. And sometimes, you can even look at it at the other way, that it helps to clean the water also. So if you keep on removing water hyacinth from the water, it's actually, you can clean up the water. In fact, water hyacinth has also been used in some countries to clean up the water because it absorbs heavy metals and other contaminants very rapidly. Of course, it has its problems, no doubt. It prevents oxidation of the water, prevents access to water for the water birds, and it competes with native plants. It's a very highly competitive and invasive kind of species. So, of course, it has its set of problems. Other water weeds, we have Pistia, which also creates problems similar to water hyacinth. And this other species on the right is Ipomia, which we see a lot growing along the shore of Powai Lake. In fact, when I was a student, we had this, a campaign to remove water. We considered it a nuisance, so we had a campaign to remove Ipomia from the lake. And we had a team of almost 50 or 100 students. One day we went to remove the Ipomia. And at the end of the day, we had cleared hardly some, 50 or 100 meters. And within a month, it was all back, So it's nearly impossible to clear it manually. But it grows very well in nutrient-rich water. So in polluted water like Powai, it tends to grow very well. But at the same time, I would say, in hindsight, it's not a totally nuisance because it provides cover to some kind of birds. Like I said, bitterns and moorhens, etc. So it's not a complete nuisance, I would say. Professor Shankar already talked about this, again, the same instance of concretization. So the concretization like this, it completely stops the natural processes which are taking place, and it does not give at all any interface between the land and the water, and it creates just a steep kind of wall or a cliff over there, and it just cannot be used by birds or almost any kind of fauna. So what are the imperatives for protecting wetlands? So sewage treatment, I think it's very important to prevent pollution of water by sewage, and especially in places like Bombay and Powai, you have to do good sewage treatment. I mean, Professor Shankar is a pioneer in this. I mean, he'd be able to, far more qualified to talk about this than me. Then protection. So these wetlands, they need a lot of protection because of human activity. There's a lot of disturbance which can be very harmful, damaging and harmful to wetlands. So you need to have protection of the wetlands, prevent disturbance to shoreline, and control on boating and fishing. I would say, I mean, I would like to say stop or prevent, completely stop boating and fishing, but you can't do that, and you risk the antagonizing the native people, local people who depend for their livelihood on fishing. So it could be allowed, but in a controlled kind of way. And finally, so what I would like to present today is an alternative. So students and faculty at nature lovers in and around IT have been worked up because some of the developments which have been going on there. And I understand it's a lot to do with developing tourism. So there is another model of tourism which can be considered at least. So many aquatic wetlands in India are partly man-made, like the famous Ranganthittu wetland in Karnataka, the world famous Bharatpur wetland. So the water has been channeled and managed well so that the wetland flourishes. So we can actually enhance the wetland values by carefully regulating the water levels, by tailoring the habitat and introducing elements which are good for wetlands. And if we can do that, in fact, there are countries, especially a lot of work has been done in UK, where they actually create man-made wetlands, and some of these wetlands are as good or even better than the natural wetlands. So something we should consider, can be considered. I mean, wetlands in general for Powai especially, and if we can enhance wetland values, we can even introduce some kind of aquatic fauna which are not there at present, like otters, turtles, other native species. But of course, you have to control sewage. Sewage treatment is very important, and if it could become a very good wetland. It could have more bird life, more biological diversity than it has at present. Protect the forest around it, like Professor Shankar said. And if we have this, then it could be developed as a another model for tourism over here. I mean, of course, there are issues. Like I can't speak on behalf of IIT. There would be issues like access to the place and all that. So all that has to be carefully considered. But this is a possible model which can be considered, right? So with that, I like to come to the end of my talk. So yeah, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, Professor Kavi Arya and Professor Vishwanathan for introducing me. And thanks to Abhyuday for arranging this program and allowing me to speak today. Yeah, thank you very much. Good day.
Yeah, people can raise hand and ask questions. So yeah, I think Professor Kalbar, yeah.
Question time.
Yeah. Professor Kalbar, can you unmute yourself and ask questions?
Hello.
Professor Kalbar, still you are muted.
Not
hear you.
Hello, can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for both the nice presentations. Thank you, Professor Shankar, for giving overarching view of wetland systems and a little bit of carbon balance and energy balance. So I agree with you about we have to do indigenous way, and the natural treatment is one of the primary way to do it. in the context of the problem we are facing of Powai Lake, I have a bit higher level question. You are proposing that, or it is a confusion that I caused during the presentation, that you are proposing to take out the lake water and then the treat, and that is the proposal I think what you have been given. My question to you is, will not be more economical and feasible to do to stop the intrusion before the lake and do the treatment. Treatment, I think that discussion I don't want to open now, but just for the planning purpose, without touching lake, basically doing the stopping the intrusion of the sewage. Basically, we know that if you have a concentrated sewage, it is much more economical and to treat than treating the diluted water in the lake. What are the so what do you think on this?
Is addressed to me, Shankar.
Yes, Professor Shankar.
I mean, if I've understood you correctly, I mean, the focus should be on ensuring that sewage doesn't enter the lake. Is that what is your question?
Yeah, in your proposal, you're showing to treat the lake water, right?
No, I mean, my proposal was by and large to create, a wetland in which there is forest protecting the lake. I mean, that was the primary focus of my presentation. The fact that there is sewage entering the lake is another issue which needs to be addressed anyway, for which technologies exist, and then that currently has been substantially taken care. As I understand, the IIT side, sewage does not enter, and from the Hiranandani side, substantially reduced, but not all. But of course, there are some habitations on the Nitti area where some sewages may be coming in. This is an additional issue. I think it's something that the corporation is probably looking at. But my focus was primarily to somehow ensure that the vegetation around the lake is substantially strengthened, and that requires space. And you cannot create space unless it is taken out of the lake. I think this is the issue which I had pointed out, and there are pluses and minuses in what I have said.
Right.
I'm sure there will be more people to comment on this.
Okay. So basically, you are not touching right now the sewage treatment part.
Yeah, there's a much that's something that solutions are known. It has to be done by the corporation.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, Maitreyi, I have unmuted. Yeah, you can unmute.
Yeah. This is for Professor Shankar. Thanks to IITB, Powai Lake today has at least 2 forest patches acting as useful embankments, Koldungri and Soneri Bagh. But these patches face a lot of neglect and abuse. How can we impress on the institute authorities to declare these patches as urban protected areas? IITB, in fact, can set an example to the other educational institutions with similar access to the natural world.
My way of looking at it, the IIT side is relatively better. 80% is outside the IIT. That's why the problem is. So we need to look at the total picture. 80% is gone. So we need to see that 80% is restored.
Maitri, I'd just like to add from IIT side that by not doing any development on those portions that you mentioned, at least we are doing no evil. And nature typically likes to be left alone. If it's left alone, it kind of regenerates.
Yeah, Mr. Nagesh, you can ask question. Yeah.
Yeah, good afternoon, sir. My question is to Professor Shankar. I'm Nagesh from Bangalore. The question is that, you talked about the carbon cycle, but what about the phosphorus cycle? Because that is also important for growth of aquatic plants. And especially hyacinth actually thrives on that. So that would be major factor in Powai Lake, especially when there is a untreated sewage or even treated sewage, because most of the STPs do not treat the NPK. What is your take on this?
The problem is well taken. See, sewage treatment must take care of nitrogen and phosphorus, and it is being done in most technologies. This is today integrated into the treatment anyway. So this problem, as far as Powai Lake is concerned, uh, as long as we stop the sewage and take care of treatment, these problems should disappear. And of course, I have not focused attention on this aspect in this presentation because I thought it was the wetland, and then many of these you know uh, nutrients, they lead to plantations, various kinds of growth, etc. And then the wetlands have gotten used to this. As Jayant pointed out, they are not all that bad anyway because the birds are able to make use of it and all that. But I have not addressed this in this presentation. It can be done. The corporations will have to focus on it, and it will be done because technologies exist.
Yeah, Professor Narayan.
Hello.
Yeah. Hello, Professor Shankar.
Hi.
I put it in the chat. Basically, the question is, if we have a medium-term plan for restoration of the lake, even if the municipal BMC doesn't kind of come in, can we have some kind of constructed wetland, SBT that you're doing, and do something? And if we do that, what are the challenges of maintenance? Like, if there is an interested group which is involved in that, what are the challenges of that? And can we actually develop those wetlands that we are developing as a kind of public space so that, the IIT community also can actually spend time there? We can use that space as a demonstration of whatever ecological value of this place, and so basically own it a bit more as a community.
Jayant is probably best to comment on this.
Yes, so like I said, it is possible already. I would say Powai is a fairly good wetland. So what is required is that it should not be disturbed. That is the main requirement. And if IIT takes a more proactive role as an institute, it should be possible to improve its values further. So, and the IIT community, if they come together, I think they can do a lot for enhancing the ecological values of Powai.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Maitreyi.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
You have again raised the hand, right? Yeah.
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. If anybody has question, please raise the hand so that, because I am not seeing the chats, and it will be easier if you can ask the question directly.
Video is on. Camera is on. Off. Can you not see them? We can see them.
Yeah. Mr. Prasad.
Hi, my name is Prasad. I stay in Powai. And there is recently an award of a tender by BMC for something like kilogram removal, 5.5 rupees. So many crores of kilogram. So total 16 crores tender for removal of all the plastic. Of course, that is welcome. Plus all the algae and whatever, the water hyacinth and all that. Are these? My first question is, I do not know who knows the answer here, but it could be to the professor or to Jayanti. Are these tenders being issued very scientifically after learning the water body and the wetland and everything? Number one. Number two, what is the guarantee that all this is removed and the water hyacinth and everything reappears maybe after 6 months, 1 year time? So is it a waste of money for public?
No, it's addressed to whom?
So I'll just take that question. About this, I don't comment on whether it's been awarded with due consideration to the requirements of the wetland, etc. But speaking specifically about water hyacinth, so the thing is there are two aspects. One is that water hyacinth, like I said, it grows in nutrient-rich waters. So you have to ensure that sewage treatment takes place properly to prevent flow of nutrients into the water. If you do that, the water hyacinth won't reappear or it will grow very slowly. Second aspect is once you have removed the water hyacinth actually grows exponentially. So the more water hyacinth is there, the faster it grows. So the idea is once it has been removed, you have to keep removing it as soon as it reappears. So you should not let it grow back completely, and then because then there will be a huge amount of water hyacinth to remove. So the idea is remove it once and then keep removing whatever remnants come up. Then it can be done at a much cheaper rate.
Yeah, hello, good evening, sir. My name is Shruti and I'm a PhD scholar here in IIT. So my question is towards Professor Shankar and Mr. Jayant. So as I understand, so the problem of polluted lakes, it's a very complicated problem wherein a lot of stakeholders have to come together. So in this case, like Professor Shankar said, only a part of Powai Lake is within the within IIT, and probably it is in a much better shape. But then, how can we ensure that we can have a dialogue with the rest of the stakeholders? Like, for example, there are interest groups within IIT, like there's a wildlife club which is in the making, there is Abhyuday, there is research happening in different departments. So, can there be a convergence of these efforts so that real change can happen on the ground? Because right now there seems to be isolated efforts happening, but then I don't know whether anything is happening on the ground as to improving the quality of the lake and restoring it.
I request Professor Shankar to answer that.
Yeah. See, madam, I mean, the problem of water quality is something that the corporation is the responsible agency. Now, public, like all of us, can represent to the corporation to do something about it, and they have their mechanisms, and the habitations around are such that there are limitations to what they're able to do. And then the Corporation of Bombay is a very, very enterprising agency, and I'm 100% sure that if a proper representation is made from IIT side, it will get done. I'm 100% sure. They're extremely resourceful agency, probably the best in this country.
Professor Shankar, Dr. Jayant, I think if you can put on the video, it will be better, because otherwise, it will be more easier. Yeah. And now I request Professor Ballal. Professor Ballal, you can unmute yourself and...
Say it again.
No, Professor Ballal, he wanted to ask question.
Balal is here, is it? On
Yeah,
this?
yeah, he's there. He's there. He's there.
I've not seen him. I've not seen him.
Yeah, yeah. See, you can see him now.
Yeah. Can you hear now?
Yeah, you can.
There was some problem in unmuting. Nice to look at.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm at my hometown now. But of course, Powai Lake is a great love still. No. It's just we have had a lot of discussion on this. I just want to ask: is it better to, in a controlled fashion, keep things like hyacinth and keep harvesting it, because it's a great cleaner of both nitrogen, phosphorus, as well as carbon in the lake. So if you can strike a balance between the nutrient intake and the growth of things like hyacinth, there may be others, and do a controlled regular basis harvesting, it is a good way to clean the water.
Point is well. In fact, Jayant has already mentioned this. But the fact is that there is a cost involved in harvesting and disposal, and both are an important cost. So it has to be done by the corporation. It's something we have to make a proposal to the corporation and get it done. It is in their agenda. And Corporation of Bombay will do. It's a very powerful agency, very enterprising agency. They will do.
Yeah.
This proposal has to go from IIT or from some agency. They will definitely do.
Also, I feel a study needs to be made about its cost effectiveness. Like, is it cost effective to do that, compared to other technologies?
No. There is of course the sewage need to be treated, but the water is already polluted. So and something will always come in rainwater, etc. So you need a method of cleaning the water in situ in the lake. And growing some of these things, because algae is very, very difficult to harvest and remove. If you don't remove algae and things like that grow, which are difficult to remove afterwards. I think, as Jayant was saying, it will settle and give you problems. I was just wondering. It's just loud.
No, I mean it can be considered definitely. I mean at least it's feasible, to do that.
Yeah, hyacinth probably is the easiest to harvest compared to those which grow in the soil, in the lowlands. Hyacinth floats. So we used to collect at one time. Many students, Jayant himself will know. We went and collect it.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
It's quite easy to collect, and it can definitely be used for cleaning up the water. That's for sure. So it's a maybe some kind of feasibility study needs to be done.
Yeah, Professor Ravana Robinson.
Hi. This is Dhruva Saikia speaking. Actually, I had two small queries for Professor Shankar. One was you mentioned that the sewage from Hiranandani has nearly been stopped, and there's very little coming in. Considering that, and also that IIT sewage doesn't go there, what is the main reason for the water hyacinth? Is it still the little sewage that comes in, or are there other factors contributing as well? And the second query was, you've been sort of keen on all these aspects over the years. Has there been any systematic monitoring of the water quality and the water level by IIT over the years, or that has not happened?
The corporation does this. They have a good record of water quality over the years.
Okay.
They have looked at various technologies for keeping the water clean, and substantially the sewage that is entering the lake has come down significantly over the years.
But is sewage still the main contributor for the growth, or is it something else?
So some amount would still come because of the fact that there are habitations around, but substantially it has been reduced. Plus the fact that the vegetations around the lake has substantially degraded, it contributes to the deterioration of the lake. And this will have to be taken care by an appropriate, licensing with the corporation. Corporation is a very, very. Bombay is a very good corporation, and they work gets done, no doubt about it.
My bottom line of my question was: is sewage still the main reason for the eutrophication, or are there other factors as well?
Mostly nutrients coming through sewage primarily.
It's still sewage, you think?
It's mostly primary. I don't think there are any factories around anyway.
Okay, thank you.
Professor Rane. Professor Rane, you can unmute
Hello?
yourself.
Yeah.
He cannot hear you, Professor.
Is my voice gone on? Yeah, I can hear you.
No, Professor Rane, I think you're still muted. You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Hello,
Yeah.
Milind. How are you?
Okay. Namaskar, Professor. It's very nice. All of
Long
you
time
here.
I've seen you.
Learn from your this. Thank you for your very educative this. I had a small comment on the water hygiene. I think what could be done is to harvest it and generate revenue out. In the sense, you see, water hygiene can be digested. Water hygiene can be burnt and used as for power generation or as a heat source. Of course, we do have to worry about the heavy metals that it might have accumulated and how that can be handled. So I'm not an expert in that area. But if it could become a revenue source, that is, whatever is harvested after it dries, it gets processed, or it is processed in a biodigester. So in that way, in fact, if water hygiene is selectively harvested, it is considered to be growing almost doubling every week if you properly harvest it. So it could be used to remove the nutrients from the lake, and then the harvested water hygiene could be used for digestion and generation of biogas or something. And that biogas could be utilized for powering gensets or things like that along the shore of the lake. So IIT can actually generate a good amount of its own power, and waste heat can be used for hot water generation for the campus residents, and air conditioning can be generated using the exhaust heat, and so on and so forth. So coming to a short thing, I think we need to look at it as a resource to generate revenue rather than an expense. And then it will become sustainable. Thank you.
Maybe Giant might want to say something, because I have not seen anything like this so far. Because I think the economics is not fitting. That's my understanding of it.
So economics will get fitted if we are using it in multiple ways. That is, after digestion, the gas which comes up it can be fed into the digesters after cleaning, and then you not only get the electricity, you use the radiator hot water for hot water utilities within the campus through hot water supply. You use the exhaust heat for generating steam and this, or air conditioning, which could be used for air conditioning of the campus buildings and offices and so on and so forth.
All these are known.
Then the slurry can go back as fertilizer or thing like that. So it has to be appropriately integrated. Just using it for heat may not work. Thank you.
It's all known, but the scale at which it is to be economical, I don't think the scale is good enough yet. All these technologies exist, the knowledge exists, but I don't think the scale is good enough for us to implement now.
Mr. Nagesh, yeah.
Yeah, actually, responding to Mr. Rane's point, in Bangalore there has been a global, exploration about this waste to energy. There is a lot of effort going on for several years, and hyacinth especially was targeted because all our lakes are actually infested with hyacinth, almost totally taken over. So, but no company has been able to offer, as Professor Shankar has told, and it is not scalable, or it is not profitable. It is not worth it
No,
for them.
it is scalable. See, you need to get quantity in sufficient quantity. Then the cost of transportation, cost
Yes,
of drying.
correct.
No, it doesn't fit right
So
now.
it doesn't at least fit the Western model, or their per capita income kind of thing. It may not be attractive to them, but
Even
given
ours.
our kind of low income group participation, and slums around lakes or whatever, they might be encouraged to do something which is at their level. It is good money for them. So
No, not
maybe.
at all. Not at all. Actually, the facts are just the opposite. See, it's not that water hyacinth usefulness is known in pulp, in paper, and so many kinds of uses exist.
Correct.
But collection, drying is a major cost. See, water hyacinth is 95% water. Okay. Therefore, so for the amount of quantity that you have to collect and transport, and what is useful to you is less than 5%. So the economics is not fitting at all.
Correct.
Okay, let me put one more thought in the mind of the audience here. We need not transport the water hyacinth. The water hyacinth can be locally harvested and then put in the floating digesters within this. Now, plastic digesters are available. They can be housed within the lake itself. So we don't need extra space also for that. And the gas generated can be tapped out from there. And then the slurry can go as fertilizer. That's one of the things that I would like to for people to consider in future. I think that is viable. Thank you.
Yeah, Professor Kaviyaria, yeah, there are no more questions. So, Professor Kaviyaria, you can.
Hello, Kavi.
Hi. I think this is one interesting idea which has come out of it. Just because it's not worked elsewhere, I think we need to do the calculations and see if there was a perhaps we can so I would like to ask Professor Shankar that, say, if there was a 1,000 square foot space on the side of the lake next to the boathouse, let's say, right? And we turned it into a factory for composting or digesting or whatever you like this water hyacinth. How would we work out the feasibility of this kind of thing? Because this is a very compelling thought.
Well, let me
That
just
actual
clarify.
process is
It's a
to
good
kind of
point. See, the Energy Systems and Engineering Department of IIT, uh, some of you may have seen next to the canteen, there is a biogas plant. This biogas plant actually is run as an experiment for the Energy Systems group of students. And then they used to buy cow dung from outside to run this plant. Okay. Now, it could as well be, powered by using the water hyacinth from the lake. Because the plant exists, it is, to my knowledge, when I was there, the plant was still there. The experiments are still running for the students as a regular postgraduate experiment. I think it was a 5 kilowatt or 10 kilowatt engine there. Now, what has turned out, they finally closed that experiment. Which I did ask why this experiment was closed. They said the economics of purchase was not working out. So
I'd
the
like to just mention
experiment
here.
was discontinued.
So, Professor Shankar, are you aware that we have a Goshala on the campus next to the
I
lake?
came to know.
Okay, so we have a captive cow dung production unit which
Also,
grazes off the grass. Yes, which grazes off the grass in the lake and creates a lot of cow dung. So maybe
we should
kind
look
of
at it again. Yeah, point well taken. We should look at it again.
We have a 2 ton per day, capacity. The food, all the food waste from the hostel. From there, we generate the gas. That kind of a system has been installed near hostel 1213. Just 1 year back, and that is reasonably working very well. I don't know whether this and this that can be connected, but it primarily uses all the food waste from hostels.
Yeah, that goes to the mess for users gas and something like that. I heard.
Yeah.
It has happened after I left. It must be more recent. Not
Yeah,
that
yeah, it has been bought out, it has been, some company has come and installed.
But the idea has been there for a while. It has been implemented. The idea has been there for a while.
I think Nagesh still has his hands up.
Yes, Mr. Nagesh.
Yeah, I had a comment to make in this context of cow dung being used for biogas. I saw one research paper which says that despite massive promotion in China and India, in both countries, the cow dung based gas plants are failing and hardly 10 to 15% is surviving. Most of them have shut down because, for example, the patty of that cow dung is actually fetches more money than what you can actually take out of the so again economics is the main reason why it is not taking hold.
So fine. In fact, I've had this very fond thought, Professor Shankar, after seeing all your work and other stuff. We make this very potent growing medium on campus called Amrit Mitti out of dried leaves, right? And couldn't much of this thing be converted into kind of compost and sold to IIT alumni outside?
In fact, while I was running this waste management plant between 89 and 99, 98, the economics was not working out at all. The cost of, taking care of the waste, not even 5% of that came back by sale of the fertilizer. So it's not an economic proposition. As long as somebody is able to foot the bill, it is okay.
Mr. Sudhir Bhave, I think you have a question.
Say it again.
No, Sudhir Bhave, he wants to ask a question.
Sudhir
Hello,
Bhave.
sir. Yes, sir. I have a small question. Can I speak?
Yeah, you are audible. Yeah, please.
Acha, I just wanted to know that I'm staying in the campus for since my birth, say 50 plus years now. And since a long time, we're seeing that cattle graze in this lake area. Also, the birds are also seen in this area. I would like to ask this question to Mr. Kulkarni, Mr. Jayant Kulkarni, that there should be different area for cattle feeding, and they should be restricted to certain areas, or the cattle can till now they are grazing in the entire lake. There should be some restrictions, or the cattle can freely move around. It will not be disturbing the birds and the ecosystem. Can you please guide us?
Yeah, so about this, I mean, in at other sites also, people have suggested that grazing of cattle should be stopped or controlled, etc., etc. But the general observation is if the number of cattle grazing is small in number, it probably doesn't cause much disturbance, because I mean the birds also view the cattle as a part of the natural ecosystem. So it does not disturb them much. Now, if the number of cattle is really large, with that trampling and causing damage, it makes sense to provide some other area for grazing the cattle. But I think under the current circumstances, considering the relatively small number of cattle in IIT, I think it should not matter too much if cattle graze there.
Dr. Jain, I want to add a point.
Yes.
In earlier times, the cattle were spread around. They were not, kept in captive, this one. But
I see.
now it is not that way. Now there is a Goshala which is kept all the cattle in that particular area, and all these cattle are taken at one shot to one place. So it's a very different scenario now than what. Yeah, I just wanted to tell you.
Right. So yes, if it's coming in a concentrated kind of fashion, and it could be causing some disturbance there. In that case, some other element should be considered. But if they, I mean, they kind of disperse, then probably it doesn't create that kind of savings. I don't know whether I've answered your question satisfactorily.
Fine, fine.
So Kaviyaria, I think now all the questions have been. Oh, Professor Ballal has a question. Yes, Professor Ballal.
Yeah, no. Coming back to that, gobar gas and biogas kind of this thing, is the output from that, the liquid slurry which comes out, is it actually a good fertilizer? Because we used to have it in my father's house. We used to have a, gobar gas plant because we have some house. And what flows out, no insects, no flies, nothing will touch it. I don't know whether it's actually because it's devoid of carbon now and it's highly acidic, I think. I don't know. Maybe Shankar or Jayant can say something about it.
I think, yeah, Professor Shankar might be able to.
Yeah, you mean regarding biogas plants you're talking about, Professor? Hello? Regarding biogas plants, is your question, Balalji?
Yeah, he was talking about, the one.
Yeah, that's right. Biogas plant. That's right.
I mean, my take on biogas is that, we have tried biogas around the country. By and large, it has not been a success story for a number of reasons. And what has really happened nowadays is that, there's not enough cattle for most of these all machines running. And cattle dung is not all that abundant for conversion to gas. It's rather be used as fertilizer directly. That investment doesn't appear to be, worthwhile from what I understand.
Yeah, no. My specific question is that whether that slurry output, is it useful at all?
The answer is that the value of the slurry as a fertilizer appears to be less than the value of cow dung itself.
Yeah, obviously.
So there is no incentive, unless of course somebody foots the bill. There is no incentive.
Yeah, Professor Rane.
Yeah, since I'm working in this area, I would like to make a few comments. We have actually transferred technology for low-cost biomodular biogas scrubbers. Okay, so they can operate at low capacity also now. Before that, I would like to answer some of the things regarding the value of the slurry. The slurry is very, very valuable, and it has been used in farms directly also in many places, and it is continuing to be used. So I agree with Professor Shankar to the extent that the value of the cake, the cow dung cake, could be more value can be realized by selling that than the slurry. That I agree. But if you value the gas that is harvested from that, then the economics is very different. Harvesting the gas and then selling the slurry is a more economical manner, and this is what is being done in large plants. And in fact, the government of India is making a big promotion about the biogas generation, and very big schemes are coming out. And this biogas is considered to be then channeled, will be channeled as bio-CNG to replace the fossil-based CNG that we are currently using. And in my opinion, the cow dung should be used as an inoculant to control the acidity of the biogas plants, and it is being used that way. And have other feeds, other post-harvest biomass and other feeds to generate this. And similarly, in this case also, Our cow dung, about 500 kgs per day from the Goshala, is being sent to the existing biogas plants on campus to maintain and control the acidity of those plants to maintain their good health. So similarly, instead of using only cow dung to generate biogas, cow dung should be an inoculant and a controlling pH control mechanism to digest water hygiene or any other. We have a lot of leaves and all that can also be digested in similar way. So you generate, you have a multiplier effect. The cow dung itself is not giving you the entire gas. The gas should come from the other bio residue which is there, and in this case it can be your water hygiene from the lake. When I was studying in Baroda almost 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago, I had done a calculation when I was doing my course project there on energy systems, and I had estimated that at that time also around 2 megawatt of power can be generated from the water hygiene harvested along the perimeter of our lake on the IIT side of the thing. And this is just the electricity generated. Similar amount of heat will be available from the radiator, and similar amount of heat will be available from the exhaust. And if all three are utilized, then the economics is very, very compelling. And a day will not be far when we will have such things operating in not only in the country, but hopefully even on it. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we don't have any more questions. And we are also running quite late. It's already 7:10. So let me thank Professor Shankar and Dr. Jain for giving a lot of knowledge about the lake, how to protect it, etc. So thank you very much for that. I also thank all the audience because they have been very systematic in asking the questions and all those things. So it was very nice. So thank you all once again. So thank you, Professor Shankar, and
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Vishnu.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kavi. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the Abhyuday team for having sort of made this happen. So, to me, they represent hope that youngsters are getting involved in bringing these kind of issues out. And they've been kind of instrumental in getting this thing together. So I'd like to Lokesh and
thank you, sir.
And Bhavna. Thanks a lot.
yeah, I just want to announce that next week, sometime Wednesday or Thursday, we will have talk by youngsters, very young people, birders of IIT Bombay. They'll be giving on primarily on birds at IIT, at Powai, which most of the photographs are taken by the birders from here. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. One thing which has come out of this maybe is a potential project. Maybe we should do a pilot with Professor Milind Rana. Right? So we should look into that. Thank you very much.
Okay, good. Good night.
Thank you, folks. Jan,
Shall we disconnect now? Shall we disconnect?
Yeah.
We disconnect? Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Bye, everybody. Yeah. Thank you so much.